Hey everyone, welcome back to Choose Courage Inc. I'm your host, Vivianne Castillo, and today we're going to be diving into a conversation that I think is really going to resonate with a lot of you, especially if you've ever felt successful at something you no longer want to do. And so my guest today is Michael Davis, a former creative director who spent 17 years at the intersection of UX and creative direction and DEI work at a Fortune 100 company. But in 2023, he made a decision that changed everything. He walked away from corporate life, not because he wasn't good at it, but because staying was costing him his health, his peace, his presence with his family. Today, Michael is the founder of Tinycup, which is a business born from a decade-long love affair with coffee as ritual and rest. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the breaking point that pushed him to leave, what it really means to start over when you're already successful, and the humbling process of building a business versus building a brand, as well as why rest isn't a reward, it's actually a form of resistance. And so this conversation gets real about the disorienting experience of being good at something you no longer want, the mindset shifts required to build something aligned with your values, and why entrepreneurship was never meant to be a solo journey. It was always meant to be a shared one. So grab your water, grab your coffee, and let's get into it. Michael, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. And like I do for all the other episodes on Choose Courage Inc., I just want to jump right in. I'm wondering if maybe let's start at the moment when everything shifted for you. What was the breaking or the breakthrough point that pushed you to leave a 17 career in design and step into entrepreneurship?
Oh man, there's a breaking point. I think that's a good word for it. Yeah, so I remember being in corporate and in that last year, 2023 was that last year, I think I realized how much my emotional health, my psychological health was starting to corrode. I was in a really lousy kind of situation in terms of my relationship with leadership that was transitioning in and the underfunding or defunding of my program. And for context for your listeners, my career in design was at the intersection of UX and creative direction and DEI, so diversity, equity, inclusion. And a lot of the programs that I was running at this Fortune 100 were quickly being underfunded and defunded. And this is right after, the push for corporations to kind of show up for Black and brown folks after 2020. And each financial kind of yearly cycle, you start to see, funding start to move away from these programs. But that wasn't the only thing that was happening for me. There was also just this really terrible relationship with leadership who I had to constantly explain the value of Black and brown people in their lives, in their financial lives on a constant basis. And I think that plus 100 other things was starting to affect my emotional health. I actually saw a doctor about my blood levels, and they were telling me what was going wrong with me, why I was going through so many swoops of depression. And most of all, my family was feeling it. Like they were experiencing me
Mhm.
coming home from work and not fully being focused or fully being present. And I just could not do that to them. And so I found a way to get out of that situation and kind of slid out alongside a lot of folks who were also being laid off. And that left me with, a lot of confusion about what was next in my life, how I was going to provide for my family in the same way, can, maintain this stability of life for my kids. And financially, I started to feel pretty unstable. I mean, we went into a bit of survival mode as well. We started, you know, getting on government health care and looking for government assistance with food and utilities and just to try to at least extend our timeline a bit for us to figure out what the next steps were professionally. So that was really like the breaking point of this pattern is not going to keep me healthy and it's not going to allow me to show up for my family. I've got to find a different path. And I just didn't know what that was. So that was like the turning point from corporate and design into, well, what's next? And you have this great program, this great platform where you're coaching want to be entrepreneurs and considering entrepreneurs. And, I'll pause here and ask you if this is okay to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Okay. You have you have this really great platform where you're coaching entrepreneurs, and, I was grateful to just kind of like, be a part of that first cohort. And I remember you asking a really, really, really important question to me, which was, what would it look like to be creative with business? What would it look like to just find joy in creating something completely new and suspend worry and fear around money for a moment? That's a really real thing, you assured me, but just suspend it for a moment and ask yourself what it would look like to be creative again. But I think the once I left corporate, there was this, what do I do question. And, it was either apply for 100 jobs, which I actually did, and then try to kind of find this familiar path and do what felt comfortable and familiar, or it was, hey, you've got a little bit of runway. What would it look like to do something really, really different with it, and maybe, potentially, maybe really love what you're doing. And what easily came to my mind and to my heart was coffee, and how would I share the way that I think about how should be experienced or could be experienced with the rest of the world.
I love that. I love that. And I think too, what I hear in your story is one that I think is rare in terms of I talk to a lot of folks these days who run themselves into the ground, who continue to tell themselves, I'll just continue to endure and endure and endure. But you took a moment of really seeing yourself and betting on yourself and exiting out of that typical experience of betray yourself until there's nothing left to give.
Oh my gosh. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I love it. And I imagine too that, especially you've had this identity as as a creative director. I imagine that that identity, that experience had also shaped or even challenged your transition into being a founder and a roaster. I'm wondering if maybe you could elaborate more or share some more insight into that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I think about a brand or a brand identity, that part feels like it comes really easily to me. I think about the message. I think about who it's going to resonate with. I picture the person who's hearing it and what's going to land for them and what's not. And so piecing together the identity of Tiny Cup was really it was the fun part, and I spent a lot of energy and time thinking about the voice and trying to get really clear about what was gonna distinguish Tiny Cup in this really saturated market of coffee from other coffee experiences, down to the logo. I mean, that was all really fun for me. So creative direction has a lot to do with that. How do we direct creative output in a way that clearly sends the message that is intended to the audience? And along the way, what are the really unique and creative things that we can do to set it apart? Whether that's the staging of that product, or if that's the messaging of that product, down to the digital assets of that product. So I invested a lot of energy and time into building that up, and I think it paid
Mhm.
off. I mean, I have a lot of fun even to this day putting out content when I have time to create content, and making sure it feels really genuine and authentic.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people miss that part about really there's a difference between building a brand and building a business.
Mm,
When you're building a brand, it's about that relationship, that story. Can your customer clients see themselves in
yeah.
what you're able to offer them and the experience that comes with that? Whereas a business is, let me make this drop shipping t-shirt company. And it's oftentimes like void of that relationship. So I love just the thoughtfulness that you put into building, yeah, a brand, something that's deeply relational.
Yeah, I mean, and that's how I've always looked at the marketing space. I mean, even when I went to college to study marketing, I knew immediately I didn't want to be at an ad agency, because my perspective at that time was I would not have a lot of control over the kind of brands that I worked on, or the kind of stories that I needed to tell or wanted to tell, how aligned with my own values that would be. But you said something really early that struck a chord with me, and that is that there's a big difference between the creative aspect in building a brand and building a business. And I don't know how many
Mhm.
times I think I've heard that in our cohort, gatherings and in our circles with Choose Courage. But I think that's probably the hardest lesson I've learned in the first couple years of entrepreneurship is, trying to
Mm,
confront this is so hard to say even out loud, even now. It's trying to confront that there might be some skill gaps. I had this 17-year career of building brands and identity and design and all this stuff, right? And I'm like, "Oh, this is gonna transfer. Like, these skills are transferable." And lo and behold, there's this whole set of other skills that are required to build a profitable business, like those keywords in particular. And I think that's been a really humbling experience to go through as an entrepreneur is, hey, dude, yeah, you're great. You do these things awesome, but you need to go acquire some additional skills to actually make sure that you can get past year 2, year 3 and build something that's in the black and not the red. So that's truly humbling.
mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the reasons why I love working with UX folks who want to explore entrepreneurship or kind of recalibrate the relationship with it is I think we are the profession who has been trained in corporate to figure things out.
Mm,
Like, you gotta be resourceful, you gotta be savvy and scrappy with the little scraps that are given to you
yes.
in the
Yeah.
corporate design industry, and we know how to figure things out. We have to learn how to, show and demonstrate value and just to connect with people in a deeper way, and so, while the skill gaps are there in the beginning and continue to be in its various shapes and forms as an entrepreneur, because 'cause we're always growing, learning, we do, I feel like, have an edge that people coming from other industries don't.
Yeah, yeah. And when I say humbling, I mean, I also think about maybe the self-doubt that can emerge as a business owner of, man, well,
Mm,
what was that? What were those past 17 years for if you can't do this, right? If you're not able to do this and just feeling, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was. But the truth is just that there's other skills. Sales strategy is like a whole thing. They hire an entire vertical around sales strategy. So I think also learning to be a little gentler with myself in the process of learning how to be a good business owner and that's harder, way harder than it sounds.
for sure. I'm curious, what's one misconception that you feel like people have about starting over, especially when you're already successful in another field?
That's such a good one. I mean, and I think about this a lot and I'm not sure if I've come up with a good answer for it other than just that starting over can either mean like you're starting with nothing when in reality you are bringing this wealth of experience, even if it's just life experience to this new task and trying to kind of access that is a not a liability but like an asset, right? Your lived experience is an
Mm,
asset. And then on the other side of that coin, not being honest with yourself that you might need to go grab a little bit more in your arsenal, whether that's, a course here or, jumping into an online class or a free class or going to your local general assembly or whatever it may be to just kind of learn a little bit about what it means to sustain and how to, manage your money and your investment. Those are things that I think can be easily taken for granted in the very beginning of starting a business, so
yeah, yeah, that resonates. Yeah, I feel like the biggest misconception is that starting over means you're starting from scratch.
Mhm.
That you're erasing everything you've built, every skill you've honed, every lesson you've earned, but you're not. You're actually just starting from experience, right? I think that people assume starting over is a step backward, but I've learned it's actually in many ways like an act of integrity, right? Like it's saying, I refuse to keep succeeding at something that no longer fits who I am.
Ooh.
And that's not failure, that's alignment. Yo, that's a bar.
It's a bar, I was gonna
Yeah,
say, that's
yeah.
a
And I
T-shirt.
think what most people don't talk about though is how disorienting it feels to be good at something you no longer want.
Wow,
And I feel like
yes.
that I'm having so many of those conversations these days. Like
Yeah.
when you've spent years building credibility in a space that no longer excites you, walking away can feel irresponsible and even reckless at times. But I
Yes.
think that staying longer in the wrong thing will actually cost you far more than pivoting ever will.
Yeah, 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 that I think that perfectly encapsulates the feeling that I had at the turning point that you asked about earlier from corporate to entrepreneurship for me.
Mm,
So it's so it and also that's affirming for me that you hear these same stories, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to what you just said.
yeah, all the time. Even for me, starting over wasn't about reinventing myself, it was about remembering myself. It was about choosing
Come on.
evolution over expectation or like truth over titles or peace over perception. I know you and I in like our friend chats, we talk a lot about peace. And it was about, yeah, choosing peace over perception. So I'll say for folks who are listening, if you're scared to start again, just know that you're not burning it all down. You're building from, in many ways, like the ashes of who you used to be. You're not losing your foundation. You're finally learning and being open to building on it with intention. And I hope that that encourages someone today who's listening to this because it's tough. It's a tough space and moment to be in for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah, yeah.
snap to that. That's it.
No, I appreciate you. I'm gonna pivot us a little bit. For me, I'm always interested, and even just in our conversations about Tiny Cup and the business you're building, about some of the mindset shifts and the challenges that you've had to kind of work through and think through. And I often see entrepreneurship as something that mirrors personal growth. Can you maybe share with us, what parts of yourself did you have to confront or outgrow in order to build Tiny Cup?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll reiterate one thing I mentioned earlier, and that was just the reality that I needed to build some skills in areas that I hadn't before. And just to press in a little bit on that, when you're a designer or when specifically when you build brands, oftentimes you are working agency side, sometimes client side, and at least in my experience, I would work on an identity or a brand for at most maybe a couple of years. That's like a longer term, but after you work on standing up a brand, you hand it off to the owner of that brand and they build from there. You're just trying to give them a
Mm,
platform. And so I think running a business past the 2nd year, you realize, "Oh, I'm the owner here, and I actually have to keep building this thing," and, it's great that the brand's resonating with folks, and I did my job well there, but now I have to sustain this thing, and I have to really pressure test the love that I have for the thing that I'm doing because I might not always be in the craft. I might be in
mm.
the spreadsheets. And I hate spreadsheets. I hate numbers. I love colors and words and space and, all it shapes. I love all of that. So yeah, just the reality of what it means to run a business 360. And also not just to do it yourself, like having to confront that I have to do this by myself in order for me to live up to whatever this idea of entrepreneurship is that I have. But reality is, there's people out there who can support you, who have done what you've done, who love and care about you that you can bounce ideas off of. And like, how do I access that community in the process of building something for my family and for the world? I think is a very important question to respond to. And that's also why I'm grateful to have gone through the cohort with you and the team at Choose Courage. That entrepreneurship cohort gave us kind of a small little family that we can, reach out to from time to time and say, "Hey, what do you guys think about this headline? What do you think about this landing page?" And just trying to get out of
Mhm.
my own head. So confronting what I think I have to do alone versus what I can do with community was an important growth opportunity for me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they see entrepreneurship as a solo journey, but in reality, it was always meant to be a shared one. And
Mm.
ideally a shared one with people that have similar values and understand that you're not trying to repeat some marketing bureau's blueprint, as you're building your business. You're trying to actually create something that's regenerative and deeply like human.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, when I'm thinking about the parts of me that I had to confront and outgrow to build my businesses, I mean, Honestly, like most of them. There's kind of like 3 that come to mind. I think entrepreneurship made me confront the part of me that equated being needed with being valuable. And part of that's a childhood thing too. If you grew up in a home with emotionally unavailable or emotionally immature parents, it's really hard to one understand and to articulate what you want, but also what you need. And
Mm.
so there's often a lot of proving that happens in the household when you're growing up. So I think I had to kind of overcome that. I had to outgrow this habit of or maybe addiction to proving, right? Because when you start building something from scratch, no one's clapping yet. And that silence will expose, like, how much your worth is dependent on being seen, right? Freaking LinkedIn makes it even worse. And so I had to face my various forms of perfectionism, and the voice that said, if it's not flawless, it's not ready. But what I learned is that perfection is often just fear with a good outfit. I'm trying to think, what else? What else? Oh, entrepreneurship, I think also just forced me to become more closer, like, more intimate with, like, my limitations and my healing. It taught me that delegation isn't weakness, it's trust, and I'm so thankful for my assistant, Annie, who also has helped me through that process, but also, like, asking for help doesn't make me less of a leader or an entrepreneur. If anything, it makes me a more sustainable one. And I think in entrepreneurship, you have these seasons where life doesn't care that you're trying to grow a business and a brand. And life and hard. And so you have to learn how to like ask for help and humble yourself in those moments.
Oh my gosh, you hit on so many important things that I didn't even think about. I mean, coming back to the notion of our upbringings and how does that shape our ideas about entrepreneurship or work. I think what was really hard was stepping away from the blueprint that I was kinda given, right? I come from a family in which,
Mm,
my brother, my sister, my parents, they all have master's degrees plus, and, I'm thankful to have, been able to go to school and get a master's degree and all that. But there was this kind of idea built up about, what does that mean for the kind of career I'm gonna have, how much money I'm gonna make, and what do I consider to be success and being able to provide for my family and create stability and the kinda home. And, it wasn't like a house on the hill sort of thing, but it was like there were certain milestones I wanted to reach that I felt were indicative of a certain kind of stability that my parents were able to give me, that I know I was like the baseline for what I wanted to give my family. And then going into entrepreneurship, I don't think there was a full appreciation for where I might struggle in all of those different areas, like how tight money might get, how much of my time and energy might be occupied differently. But that actually is an interesting stepping stone into the other thing you mentioned around like kind of the intimate journey of entrepreneurship and having good people around you to soften that walk. I don't
yeah.
I'm certain I would not have made it this far in my entrepreneurial journey if I didn't have the soft landing that my family has given me. Because while I think
Mhm.
I'm so emotionally invested in what it is that I'm creating, the amount of stress that I feel today, or the quality of the stress that I feel today, doesn't even compare to the kind of quality of stress that I felt when I was in corporate. I mean, I was
Oof.
emotionally unavailable on so many nights for my
Mhm,
family. It was the type of stress that my wife now says, "I don't ever want you to see or experience that kind of stress ever again. The stress you have now, I take it any
mhm,
day." Because it's a stress about something
mm,
that I care deeply about, and it's something that is deeply aligned with my values, and that it's sort of like a natural stress that should come of something you care deeply for. In the same way you might stress about, your children and where you see them in life and how you want them to be successful. Your business is sort of your baby in that sense as well. So in that sense, I get to ask a lot of deep and difficult questions to the people who care and love me the most. I didn't get to do that in corporate. I didn't get to ask my
mm,
colleagues who, the same questions and at the same time of night, at 11, 12 o'clock at night, I'm asking these difficult questions about the business to someone who cares about me and who's going to give me answers that are in my best interest and in my best health. So it's a completely different ball game in that
mhm.
regard.
100%. And the other thing I'm hearing that you had to outgrow was the belief that success and suffering were twins.
Ooh, okay. Yes.
That to be taken seriously, we have to be constantly tired, constantly grinding,
Mhm.
constantly committed in a way
Absolutely,
that just grinds us, right? And I
absolutely.
think now it's understanding that ease doesn't mean that we're slacking. It means that we finally built something aligned with who we are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's really the premise and the stepping stone, or maybe the best word is the point of departure for Tiny Cup. We
Mhm.
talk a lot about coffee as a ritual, but that really is language born out of the work of Trisha Hersey. Many of your listeners might know Trisha Hersey from the Nat Ministry, but I think of Tiny Cup as kind of a child of her book Rest is Resistance. And in her book, she explores this idea of grind culture, which is what I'm hearing from you. Like this, as she defines it, this toxic productivity obsessed system. It's rooted in capitalism, rooted in white supremacy. It dehumanizes us and equates our worth to our output, to our productivity. And so many of us have felt that, especially
Mhm.
prior to becoming entrepreneurs. And so, I appreciate how Percy reframes the idea of rest and restoration as not something that's like, we're idly doing or we're lazy, but as a spiritual and a very physical and psychological practice and necessity really for healing and for liberation. And so that becomes like
Yes.
the fertile ground that Tiny Cup really is born from.
Hey, this is Vivianne, and I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. And I just wanted to pause for a quick moment to say that this podcast is ad free on purpose. And we want to keep it that way so that it feels like a space that's just for us and just a little bit more divorced from noise on what we should buy and what we should consume. And so the best way to help us do that is by sharing it with someone you think would really connect with it, someone who you think would feel encouraged or get something out of this episode, or by leaving an honest review because it helps more folks find us. And honestly, it could be the exact thing someone else needed to hear today, just because you took a moment to spread the word. So thanks for being here. I appreciate you, and let's get back to it. Yeah, and I know you've also spoken about rest as a ritual, not as a reward. How did that philosophy emerge from your own burnout or busyness?
Yeah, yeah. So rewinding back to 2023, when I left corporate, coffee for me has kind of always been this ritual of rest. And I didn't frame it that way initially, but going back 10, 11, 12 years, when I first experienced the ways that the Somali community in Northern Virginia, where I was living, was had a communal kind of brotherhood and sisterhood and rest ritual around tea. When I first experienced the ceremony of coffee in the Ethiopian community of Northern Virginia and saw coffee being roasted for the first time in a pan, I was captivated by that and wanted to learn that from the community. And I was, so grateful to kind of be embraced by the Ethiopian community of Northern Virginia. And they taught to me how to roast coffee, why they roasted coffee, the history of coffee. And I began to do that for myself on the weekends as sort of like a respite and like a space of solace when I was burnt out from the week in corporate. And so for 10 years, yeah, I'd been roasting coffee and I got pretty good at it. And I started sharing it with friends and family and kind of got known as the guy with the coffee. But it was just preserving that ceremony and that ritual and the ways that indigenous coffee communities of the global south experience coffee and tea was fascinating to me, and it gave me a space to find solace and rest. And so I started to frame that as a ritual. And so when I think about Hersey's work, Rest is Resistance, her whole call to action for her readers is to prioritize these small, consistent acts of rest to build individual and communal care. And so when we were creating Tiny Cup, our response to that call was like, how could we help everyday people change their relationship to coffee and see it not as fuel for productivity on Monday, but as an experience, a daily experience of rest and restoration. And so I believe like the pathway to learn from indigenous coffee growing communities in the way that I've learned from them for generations who have experienced coffee in this way is to honor them through this special fruit, this thing called coffee, this drink that's the second most popular drink in the world after water. So many of us in the West have kind of used it as this battery pack. But for me and for so many, it's really a chance to pause. So that's kind of the
Mhm.
connection there.
I imagine it must be more of an art than a science in some ways to hold this tension between running a business, a profitable business, while also protecting kind of like the sacred space that you've cultivated for Tiny Cup and what Tiny Cup stands for. How do you do that? How do you hold that tension between running a business and protecting kind of the sacredness that you've cultivated around Tiny Cup?
Well, I think the goal initially was for there to be as little tension as possible between between these 2 things, and maybe
Okay.
it's I think it started that way, but to be very honest with you, Viv, I think after year 2, after all of the material investment, the tension is a little harder for me to hold sometimes. Um,
Mm,
I do find myself having to work a little harder to keep that space sacred. But in that tension that is still very much there, there's still like a connection to what's real and authentic and genuine for most people right now, especially right now in the world and in America. And I think in that I find a lot of really rich, I hate to say content, but rich things to communicate to people through Tiny Cup, through the voice of Tiny Cup
mhm,
who are struggling and to let them know that there are small, delicate ways, tiny ways to still find joy, to still find calmness, to still find peace. And so for myself, like I have to be my own customer first. I have to be my best customer. So when I wake
yes.
up and I go make a cup of coffee, like I can't rush through that. Like I have to sit and listen to the gurgle of the coffee maker or listen to the sound of the grinder and just notice what I'm hearing. Notice the weight of my cup when I pick it
Mm,
up, smell of the coffee. I have to run myself through some of these anchors to slow myself down so that way I can be the best at this job that I've created for myself.
mm, yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I love that, and I love the intentionality and really the relationship that you're thinking about in terms of you to the brand, to the business, to yourself, making sure you are the first customer, the first person you're serving. When I think about how does one hold tension between running a business and protecting the sacred space around their business, I often go back to, okay, well, what do these two things ask for?
Mm,
So business asks for structure, for clarity, for systems, for outcomes. Whereas things that are looked at as sacred, sacred asks for surrender. It asks for slowness, for silence, for faith in what can't be measured. And that is business at its core. And I used to think that those two things were in conflict, that I had to choose between being strategic and protecting kind of this sacredness around something different and unique that I'm building. But I've learned that the real work is holding them together without letting either consume the other. And
mm,
that's why I feel like it's more of an art than a science because there's certain seasons where it's, I got this. This is super chill and easy
yep,
to do. And there are
yep,
seasons where it takes a lot more effort and it takes a lot more energy to do it. And so I know like for me, I try to protect the sacred by giving it time and rhythm inside the business.
mm,
So practically, what does that look like? It means I build margins around my creativity. I do have just certain blocks of time in the day just to build, to think, to create. I give myself what I call chaos buffers. So if I have a client and I think I can deliver what they need in a day, I'll tell them I'll give it to you in 3. 'Cause I need to kinda create some space for life to be life in. I need to create space so I can rest on purpose, so I can
Mm,
say no to opportunities that feel shiny, but really they would just be taking and extracting from my soul and my spirit.
yeah.
And I think, protecting the sacred also looks like, how do I create room for mystery, for the things that I can't spreadsheet or optimize, but that somehow always guide me back to alignment? And so I know for me, like running a business will always invite me toward control, but protecting the sacred reminds me that some of the best things I've ever built came from moments when I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just listening to what my body wanted, what my spirit needed, what people I was in a relationship with, what they were wanting. And that tension doesn't go away. It's something that I think we have to learn how to manage, not necessarily fix. And I've learned that when I honor the sacred, when I let stillness lead strategy, when I'm trusting my gut more deeply, when I'm more committed to creating margins for creativity, that the business not only grows, but I feel like it also grows in the direction of what is bringing my spirit and my energy like peace.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that. It reminds me of that first year in business and some of the rituals I was creating around how we conducted business. And
Mm,
and it's also, I think, an encouragement for me to remember some of that and bring some of that back into my year 3 version of this business. And maybe that's something that a lot of folks can relate to. You may start off a certain way, and then there are certain pressures and certain variables that you didn't know you were going to experience in the process of building a business that can maybe challenge the commitments that you had to your own rest and to your own values. And it's a really good reminder to kind of revisit those and firm them up and make them stakes in the ground that you can always kind of refer back to or anchor to and keep as your North Star. We
mm,
have this saying in Tiny Cup: first we roast, then we rest. First we roast, then we rest.
mm,
And initially what that meant was when we were going through the roasting process, there were certain days that we roasted and certain days we didn't, which mean coffee wasn't available on certain days because we needed time to like recoup from the fulfillment process. That
yeah.
did become a little challenging when we were trying to scale. So now it's okay, now we have a new challenge to overcome and figure out what does roast and rest look like when you're at scale. And I think that's still a challenge that we're
Mm.
we're trying to respond to now.
Yeah, and when I think about you and Tiny Cup, I think about just the level of intentionality you've put into challenging the status quo of how business can be and like should be done. And I'm wondering, how do you see Tiny Cup as maybe what I would describe as a quiet rebellion, against speed, extraction, or even capitalism's version of success?
Yeah, what comes to mind for me here, and I don't want to throw any particular vibe, as the young folks say, under the bus, but I think about the ways that third wave coffee have really just kind of taken over the Western coffee culture and the ways we think about what coffee is. And I think there's some really amazing things about third wave coffee. And there's some things that are a little bit that need to be challenged. I think there's this really great emphasis on coffee origins, single origin, relationship with farmers, relationship with coffee farms, and how to bring great quality to tables from the farm. And then there's other parts of it that feel really problematic to me, which is this kind of overemphasis and value of this artisanship and precision when it comes to coffee roasting methods that forget the indigenous coffee communities that really grow up and cultivate and harvest this fruit. And so when I think about Quiet Rebellion, there are some things that need to be challenged in the coffee industry and the coffee space that have to do with the way that it's the idea of coffee has been colonialized rather than paid homage to. And for Tiny Cup, I think that happens on a customer by customer basis and also in the language we use and what we are coaching our audience to do with the coffee in their hands. For me, the quiet part of Quiet Rebellion is how can I coach our customers to think about coffee more intentionally? What happens before and during and after the coffee is consumed? Whether that's knowing where the coffee comes from itself to, what are the few minutes that I have just before I enjoy my coffee or my tea or whatever it may be when I can transform my routine from hit this button, pour this, put it in my to go, and then go, to becoming a little bit more of a ritual that helps me to self regulate and helps me a little bit more to be in a bit of a meditative state when I'm drinking my coffee. For some of us, those few minutes are the only few minutes we have that we actually focus on ourselves. And so, why not make the most of that time and not
Yeah.
wake up in the morning and make my coffee about how do I keep my eyelids open, but how can this be an intention setting opportunity? When I go to the break room in the middle of the day at work to refill my cup, instead of it being, a moment to refuel to get ready for the afternoon, can it be a chance to self-regulate and care for my nervous system before I go into this crazy meeting I'm about to go into? And then the rebellion part of that to me is, in spite of this new age kind of coffee movement, there are indigenous coffee growing communities that have experienced coffee this way, this restful way for generations. I think about the Oromo communities of Ethiopia and the Bunna ceremonial coffee. It's this hours long ritual of rest and storytelling. I think about the Dominican culture of coffee, the daily harvest and the families that pan roast coffee and grind the beans with the pilon or the mortar and pestle and boil down the chafings and brown sugar and share with one another this special coffee tradition. So these are all, I think, examples from coffee growing communities today, but also historically, that have resisted this haste and this extraction and commoditization of coffee. And there are many forms of communal preservation and caregiving in these ceremonies.
Yeah, something that I hear as they're talking is what would it look like if we were more intentional with the moments that we are already experiencing, like making coffee, to relate to those more from a place of how can I be and feel more free? It's so much more than just a moment. Like it's an opportunity to experience a sense of grounding and freedom that many of us are often denied throughout the day. And so I love how you're introducing that. I love how you are using coffee, your brand, as a way to invite people more into that. And I know you've also been creating some things within your business to better support folks around that. I know you have your house roast. I know you have something called the Rest Shop. I know you're working on an ebook on called Coffee Rest Rituals. Yeah, what's the tea? Share a little bit more
Yeah.
about what you've been building, how people feel more free when it comes to their relationship with coffee.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, so far I've been talking a lot about coffee and how we drink it, how we experience it, but also I think about the environment that we create around that coffee or tea ritual that a person may have in the morning. How can I reinforce some of these ideas around a restful, restorative coffee drinking experience outside of just what I put in my cup? And so all that to say, the Rest Shop is dope, and I hope people visit the Rest Shop. I don't think I've seen anything like it in the coffee space or in most spaces. This is a place where you go on our website to curate an environment of rest all around you. We have things on our website such as posters that say you deserve rest. We have these, gentle nudges and reminders in your environment. In your wardrobe, we have tees, we have hoodies. It's hoodie season at the time of this recording. We've got blankets,
Yes.
and one of my favorite products is our pillows that say, "Nah, you should lay down." Put that on your couch and see if it's not going to draw you to it after a long day of work. But really just like how do you curate this kind of environment around you that reminds you constantly? You have these anchors all around your room that kind of say, you know what, you deserve this. You deserve to be rested. You deserve to have a moment for yourself. And so, we also have the book. I'm really proud and excited to be announcing Tiny Cup Coffee Rest Rituals, which is this
Yes.
30 plus page ebook. I'm so excited to get it in people's hands. But in this book, we're going to help you build your own coffee rest ritual. So this book walks you through how to use your five senses to make the process of making and drinking your coffee much more intentional, using what we call the Tiny Cup Rest framework, which is to reflect, engage, savor, and transform, and just accept these subtle invitations around you that could be used as anchors to remind you to rest. In this book, we also talk about the history of coffee and the vivid stories of real farmers, everyday people with jobs and businesses who are finding new ways to rest and to do that through coffee. And some of the indigenous stories that I referenced earlier, from Ethiopia to farmers in Yemen to Brazil to the Dominican Republic. And there's some fun worksheets in the book and journaling prompts for those who like to journal. And we're currently running a pre-launch special of 60% off during the launch period. But for those who of your listeners who may find this recording like down the road, I have a special gift for all of you. If you decide to get the book or anything from the Rest Shop, you can put in the code at checkout, choose courage 25, and I'll give you 25% off of anything you want. So it doesn't matter when you hear this recording. I think you'll love something from the Rest Shop.
Yo, you're so generous. I appreciate you. Well, and for folks who are listening, we'll put the links in the show notes as well as the code, so you can easily access that whenever you're able to. But I Gosh, and again, as I look out at the world and how things are going, we need to be even more intentional with not betraying ourselves. And so I love how you're helping us to do that by reconnecting us to our commitment to our bodies through rest, our recommitment to our spirit, to our energy, to our passions through rest. So thank you for being so generous and also being willing to extend a discount so you could make this more accessible for folks who are wanting to take that step and actually start to feel a little bit more restored within themselves. If if someone listening today, right now in this moment, if they feel disconnected or they feel overwhelmed, what's maybe one small ritual that they can start tomorrow? Maybe even with a cup of your coffee in order to begin restoring themselves. What kind of piece of advice, tidbit would you give us?
Yeah, I think the underlying theme across maybe everything your listeners have heard from me today is that if you really, really pay attention, if you really pay attention, anything can be an invitation to rest. From
Mm,
the open window that's blowing a curtain in your room to a little bit of sunlight or shadow that's coming through, and it's about paying close attention. And so I think that's a really good place to start in terms of creating any kind of rest routine. Even without coffee, it's just slowing down and paying attention to what's around you. And that can even be your breath. A lot of this you can find in a lot of mindfulness practices. Listening to your gut, being consistent, with whatever's in front of you, placing one foot in front of the other, especially when you don't feel motivated, because that consistency will eventually bring back that motivation. And just this notion of rest is so important to your health, to your emotional endurance, to your psychology. I always tell, my kids, in sports, yeah, you want to outwork the competition, but more than that, I need you to outrest the competition. And how important that is to just being able to sustain and endure. And if you need a little bit more to kind of help you getting started, we have this really cool free email course that we just launched as well for those who, just need a little bit of a nudge and they spend a lot of time in their inbox. On our website, you can sign up for a free email course called The Sensory Joy of Coffee. And, periodically we have 6 lessons that we'll just send your way and help you to think about, how do I use my sight this morning? How do I use my smell this morning, my hearing this morning? And we also have offered alternative paths of experiencing coffee that for our communities that see and hear and smell in different ways than others. So we've thought about the
mhm.
entire community as much as we can to just give everybody a chance to get what they deserve, and that's rest.
Yo, let's go. Let's get it. I want to end us with hope and again just some more actionable takeaways for folks who are listening today. My final question for you is for anyone who's navigating change or redefining success in their own lives, what's your invitation to them?
Yeah. I think my invitation to all of you is the same invitation that I give myself every day, and that is to try to listen to my gut, listen to my instincts. My lived experience is really, really important, and it's what's brought me to this point, and it's what's going to take me further. So, trusting myself, trusting yourself, and one of the greatest forms of self love is to be consistent with what it is that you're doing. And so, just place one foot in front of the next foot and wait to see what happens, and then return back to some of the pillars that you've established for yourself, your values or your constitution for your business or whatever that may be. And of course, go lay
Mhm.
down somewhere. Go lay down somewhere.
That's so, so, so good. I'll build on it by adding, for folks who are navigating change or redefining success in their own life, my invitation for you is to let it be messy.
Mm,
Stop trying to make transformation look inspirational. Change is not a straight line, it's a spiral. Circle back to old years, old patterns, old
Yeah.
versions of yourself. But time, you'll meet them with more truth. You'll meet them with more tenderness. You'll meet them with more awareness of who you're becoming. I would tell them you don't need a 5-year plan to move forward. You just need to tell the truth about what no longer fits. You just need to trust that clarity often shows up after courage, not before it. And redefining success isn't about trading one finish line for another. It's not about switching from one carrot to chasing a new one. It's about letting go of the need to quote unquote arrive, right? It's about building a life that feels spacious enough for your becoming, not one that demands you stay small to keep it neat and tidy. So, my invitation is this: it's be brave enough to disappoint the old version of yourself who thought safety meant control. I feel like that's something I'm constantly confronting, and be gentle enough to honor the part of you that's scared to let go.
I love it. Let's go.
Let's go. Before you hop out of this podcast, I just want to share something with you. If you're a UX professional feeling the pull to leave corporate and build something aligned with who you actually are, I want you to know about this experience that we're doing in January called The Walkout. It's a 2-day virtual conference happening January 15th and 16th, and it's designed specifically for folks exploring their exit from corporate. So whether you're thinking about starting an agency, maybe you're thinking about stepping into entrepreneurship, or even building a trauma-informed consulting practice, we're going to get real about what it actually takes. And we wanted to make sure that it was super affordable. Tickets are $149, and 20% of revenue, we're going to be donating it. We're going to be donating it to the Greater Chicago Food Depository, as well as the National Immigrant Justice Center. I'd love for you to join. I'd love for you to learn more, and you can do so at jointhewalkout.com. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. But again, thank you for listening. And if this spoke to you, I hope you're able to share it with someone who needs to hear this episode as well. And remember, starting over isn't starting from scratch. See you next time. And of course, drink some water.